You're listening to Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. On our podcast, the goal is not just to share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon and talk about what we're learning and what God is doing in us and in our community. The conversation you're about to join was inspired by our Spring Mixtape 2025 non-series sermon series. Rather than a series, this will be a collection of sermons based on what God is leading us to preach on this spring. You can find out more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation.
So congratulations, we hit over 7,000 listens.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that like everyone, like if everyone like goes back and re-listens to something, or is it like
7,000 listens?
Okay.
I don't know
Okay.
how else you would measure it.
To, like streams it or downloads it.
okay?
Yeah, and so at the pace that we were anticipating when we started, it should only be like 3,000-4,000.
Well,
There's something.
sorry, Pastor Scott almost got killed.
So for those that are just listening, Pastor Scott was almost beheaded by his whiteboard, practically. Out of nowhere. That's what that screeching sound was. I don't know if you could pick that up on the mics.
At least it wasn't the guitar.
Oh, that was bad.
It would never.
But today, on a very special episode of the podcast, we have with us Lydia Baudelaire and Elizabeth Boswell, also known as Lydia and Lizzie. And Pastor Scott is still with us, since he didn't get decapitated by his whiteboard.
And I've never heard either of them called either Lizzie or Liddy.
Lillian calls
Because
me
you're never
Lizzie.
either.
Yeah. Lily calls me Liddy sometimes too.
There you go.
See?
So it's like Lid or Liz.
Like
No E.
Liz, Libby.
Anyway.
So many.
The reason why we have y'all on the podcast today is because you guys both share testimonies at our Youth Sunday this past Sunday. I have so many thoughts and questions about the concept, before we get into your specific stuff, the concept of Youth Sunday in general. When you think of Youth Sunday, what comes to mind and what expectations do you have?
Like for me, what first comes to mind is just youth, like running the service, which is basically what it is. And I really like the concept of it. I like how, especially at how we do the first service as well, we can get some of the older people to like get to know the youth better, see them more involved in the church, because I know a lot of them say stuff about that. They want to see the youth more involved. I feel like this is a really good opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And fun facts, not all churches have their youth run all of Youth Sunday. Sometimes they just like share the testimony time and then it's normal everything else. So yeah, but I love that that's your expectation.
Yeah, I like agree with Lydia, but I also feel like when I was like writing my testimony, I was really worried that people weren't going to take me seriously, because I feel like some people kind of think of youth as like these are the kids of the church. They grow up to be the church, not really thinking that they are the church. And I feel like there's like a lot of separation there, and I feel like that just kind of brings everyone together. And like the youth do have something to say, and a lot of our youth are very grounded in their faith, and I feel like very like walking with the Lord. And it's just like something that like we should be sharing.
Yeah, I went on a mini rant with someone on Sunday about how like I don't want our youth to be viewed as like, oh, it's cute, our young ones are up on the stage doing Jesus-y themed stuff, and then we'll have like real worship next week. Because I think what you guys provide in example and leadership in this church is worth more than a lot of what those people that would think that offer to the congregation. In all congregations, not just specifically our church, but that's a common thought process in many churches in regards to youth leading in church. And I think it's a real shame, not just because of what you guys bring to the table, but it's a shame for those people as they close off their hearts and minds to what God can be trying to say to them and teach them through what you guys are doing. Scott, what's your been experience of Youth Sunday through the decades?
We never had enough youth to really do Youth Sunday or anything like that in the church I grew up in. So that's not something that was like part of the church I grew up in. That's true. And so after we started a contemporary service for a while, we had somebody who came in and led worship for us, but then they were moving on to other things. And so I just became like the standard guitar player, worship leader, all the things in the contemporary worship service that we had before all the normal stuff started on Sunday morning when I was like 15 or 16. So kind of every Sunday was Youth Sunday in a way. But I love it, and I love not just getting a Sunday to sit in the congregation with my wife and worship together, but I love the opportunity to hear what God's doing in real time. And I think it can be hard for people who are a little older to be as focused on what God is doing. And when you ask a lot of adults to give a testimony, they'll tell you all about how they became a Christian, rather than, here are the things God's been doing over the last few months, like we heard from these young ladies this week. And so I love that. It's encouraging to me, and I wish we could do it more often. I'm not opposed to doing it more often.
Not my job description.
When I got here, they did Youth Sunday on the Sunday in between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah, I hate that.
And I said, we got to change this.
Yeah. Because they always try to give we know it's going to be low attendance week, so we're going to give them that week so that the pastor can go on vacation, whatever. Which Pastor Scott was just giving a thumbs up to. That's odd. But
Get your eyes straight, Jeremy.
That's another reason, sadly, why I don't advertise Youth Sunday publicly, and I've already forewarned the youth about this. It's not because it's not something to get hyped about and very excited about. Sadly, people have those misconceptions about Youth Sunday and will just not show up. And so to help them not miss out on what God is doing and going to share through that time, I don't advertise it ahead of time. And since we don't do it on the typically scheduled Sunday, they don't anticipate it happening on a specific Sunday. And so in my time as a youth and in youth ministry, Youth Sunday has always been a 2 weeks before trying to get kids to commit to do something and a part of it and share and whatever it may be.
Twisting arms.
Yeah, all the twisting arms. But because of Safe Sanctuary, we don't do that anymore either. And so now, definitely going to have to cut that out. But this year, Lydia, I think you came up to me February?
I remember it being early on in the year, well before Student Sunday.
Yeah, so how did you know you wanted to share what you shared on Sunday or share it all on Student Sunday?
I remember I shared my testimony in youth group, I think it was last year. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, I just felt something in me, I felt led to share my testimony, not just with the youth group, but with the church overall. I feel because it's been such a big part of my life, and seeing how much my faith has changed my life, I want to share that with more people.
Speaking of yours in specific, you talked about how when we did our Lent challenge, reading John was a big moment for you in the development of your faith. Can you explain a little bit about what our Lent challenge is and what you experienced in that time?
So my first Lent challenge when we started it was my junior high year. So I wasn't doing the phone portion of the challenge yet. I was just reading John. And like I said in my testimony, it was the first time I'd read my Bible in depth. I've never done a study like that before. I've just seen verses mentioned in Sunday school, just read those. But I never read through a whole book before. Once I started reading that, I read a chapter or two every night. I was so motivated to keep going. I was okay, this is right for me. I want to keep doing this. This is really helping me. And it was just an amazing experience overall, seeing how much that little thing, even buying a new Bible and how that changed it. I'm seeing how much that changed my faith.
And you had mentioned that you came to me asking for, what do I read next? I did John now. And so, do you remember, because I always give a basic lineup. Do you remember what the basic lineup is and why?
I do. I have it in my Bible. Jeremy drove me home from youth group one night, and I asked him...
Were we rocking out to Queen?
Oh yeah, we were.
Yeah, okay.
We were headbanging to
I
Bohemian Rhapsody. I remember I asked him, and then he gave me a whole list, and I wrote it down the second I got home, and I still have it in my Bible, and I added a few more.
Oh.
So we finished John, and then started on Matthew, Acts, and then James, and those were the ones Jeremy gave me. And then after that, I've read Ephesians, Romans, Hebrews, Galatians, and I'm in Philippians right now.
Per my request.
Yes.
That's so awesome.
And then I've been asking Jeremy a few more times, what should I read next?
Yeah. And the reason I always say, look, you read John, which covers a lot of like why Jesus came and why things happened in the Gospels. And then I would say pick one of the first 3 to figure out what happened, because there's a lot more of what he did in his ministry in the first 3. And if you want to hear like the continued story of the apostles, you go into Acts, which is what you did. And then if you want a good, less metaphorical way of how we're supposed to live as Christians, James really does a good summary. And I always push our youth, our young adults, anybody that asks me. I'm fully convinced, and I would love to have anyone come on the podcast and argue with me, because I love arguing with people. Scott's lining up to argue with me. That if you believe and live out what you read in one of the first 3 Gospels, John and James, you are better off than 99% of Christians in the church today. Scott's nodding his head yes. So if you would like to argue that, listener, come on. I would love to, because it's the cores of the Christian faith. It's the cores of how we live out our faith. So when you know Jesus, you follow what he's calling us to do, and you have a little more practical guidance in James of what that can look like in the daily life. Instead, because people get really overwhelmed with holding the entire Bible and thinking, in order to live the fullest of Christian life, I need to go beginning to end. And there is purpose and reason for reading every single book of the Bible. And we talk about that at other times. And those are not, the books I'd mentioned are not the only ones we study at youth group. But as a core starter set, and like you really embrace what's in those books, it sets you up for success. And so I'm so glad that you've been continuing in your word. And those aren't, all the books she listed aren't ones that we've been reading as a youth group. She's been doing it on her own time.
But my favorite epistle, specifically from Paul, is not on your list, and it's Colossians. So I'll
That's
just
on
throw
my
that
list.
out there.
I want to read that after
All right.
Philippians.
Oh, that's really good to know. I didn't know Colossians was your favorite epistle. I mean, they're all great, but I didn't know.
But it gets like, it starts out with this beautiful picture of who Jesus is and what God has done for us, and then it moves into, okay, so now because of all this, this is how you live, and gets into like relationships. You know, Paul gets very specific about like you've got to clothe yourself with love and compassion and kindness, and I mean, it does get a little more metaphorical, like you were saying, but that idea that like we don't just get dressed once and live in it for the rest of our lives. Like there's this daily aspect to it, and it's the same in our faith. And so yeah, I love Colossians.
Well, now that you summarize it, you don't have to read it. Problem solved. No.
Oh, let's better go.
But shortly after you came up to me, I was like, oh, Lydia's like set. So now I'll just wait till like the month before, and I'll start putting feelers out and see if anyone, you know, would be willing to share. But then within a couple of months, because I think it was maybe April.
I think it was March.
No, first week of April.
It was April. Because that's when we got picked.
Yes.
April, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
First week of April is when Elizabeth shared hers, and I think it was like a week or two after where you were like, I think I want to share it on Youth Sunday. And so why did you think what you shared at youth group was worth sharing with the whole congregation?
I don't know. I think like even before I shared at youth group, I've been like, I felt like God wanted me to share something. I don't know. I just felt like being a senior and then not having an opportunity, I didn't want to like miss an opportunity. And then like youth group, I think we talked about seeing how that went, how long that was, and seeing if I like wanted to do it at church. And so then like it went well, but like I don't know. I felt like I was rambling half the time, but I felt like could be used in a different way, not just like with my friends who had already heard the story like 3 times, if not more.
So neither of you just wanted to hear your voices on a bigger stage?
Oh, heck no.
No, thank you. Not a fan of my own voice through a microphone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Public
We
speaking.
can all relate to that in this room. People can't hear the eyebrows. Anyway, but with that, it's one of those things like whenever I like joke with someone about like them preaching or sharing on Sunday, they're like, oh, that's not me. Oh, that's not me. And I think at any point, if I ask like, oh, are you one of those people that would love to get up and go and preach on Sunday or go and share a testimony on Sunday? We're like, there's an era of hesitance of doing it, but you felt called to do it and you wanted to be faithful in doing it and share, and we're already seeing the fruit of you guys sharing on Youth Sunday. And so I hope that other people can see, be encouraged by your example in speech, in action, in purity, all the things that you see in Timothy talk about for our youth. Is there anything that, if due to the fans in the sanctuary, because we did have air conditioning issues on Sunday, if people maybe they were zoning in and out as they were focusing on fanning themselves or whatever it may be, what are like some of the key messages that you, or most important takeaways you hope that someone had walking away on Sunday? How God's going to impress on them may be different than how you thought he would or how you intended, but what's something that you hope that they would take away from what you
I would
shared?
just say, like, the verse I mentioned, Jeremiah 29:11. Like, I know it's a common verse, a lot of people know it, but it just really stuck with me, especially writing my testimony, seeing how, like, God knew I was going to come to Collingswood. He knew that's going to be the right place for me. Like, he always knows where you're going to go, where you've been, and how that will affect how you see him. And especially how, like, the community here at Collingswood, how much that has impacted my faith. Like, God knew I needed that. Like, he knew I needed to come to the youth group, especially since I never went at Trinity. Mm-hmm. Jeremy had to bribe me on Sunday mornings, trying to get me to go.
I memorized Hamilton for you, and still nothing.
Nope. But yeah, just like seeing how much that impacted my faith, I'd love to like for people to know that how much community can benefit you, especially since God knows how much it'll benefit you. He knows like everything.
I loved almost how like yours led into Elizabeth's, because like time, placement, God having a plan, and then hers connecting with the Romans 8:28 of like knowing the plans of God is for the good of those who love him according to the purpose of his will. I thought they complemented each other very well, because sometimes when you do like various testimonies, they're either like complete different worlds and they don't connect whatsoever, or they feel like the same message but like in a different way of sharing it. But it felt very much like yours complemented each other's, which was really nice. And so what's something that you were hoping people would take away from yours, Elizabeth?
Learning to surrender everything in your life, and the difference between like not caring what happens and just being like leave it up to the universe. And I'm in quotation marks, up to the universe. But like, I don't know, like surrendering is just like entrusting God, like knowing that like what you're doing is for him. So like having that mindset of like, is this glorifying God? Like, am I doing this for myself, for others, for the way they view me, or for the way that like God's going to view me, or people are going to view God through what it is? And I feel like sometimes it's just hard to miss that unless you like hear it like directly to you, because like it's taken this long for me to figure that out.
Yeah. And I think take people much longer times in their lives. I think it's one of those things, you made such an important distinction of sometimes when people hear like, oh yeah, I'm just trusting God with it, that it means like, oh, I don't care what happens, or whatever happens is just going to happen. But like with we care what's going to happen, the stuff that we don't understand, we entrust with the one in control, and we care about those involved and that kind of thing. And it's so important. At the end of your testimony, you shared about like, you're going away to college and what you hoped our church would be like in the future, of being more loving, being more united, growing and transforming more into the image of Christ. If that stuff didn't happen, what would our church look like in 6 months or 8 months when you come back from college?
If we just stayed like where we were now.
Yeah.
I guess I would just kind of walk in, like, I guess there would just be a big difference between, like, the feel and, like, the atmosphere. Because sometimes I feel like sometimes you just walk in places and you can just feel God's presence. Mm-hmm. And then when people get, like, stuck in their routine of, this is Sunday morning, I go to church, then it kind of loses its, I guess, like, I don't know how to describe this. It's just, like, I just feel like I wouldn't get much out of it anymore. It just wouldn't feel as connected with the body of Christ together.
And I think that's not that necessarily it would be palpable to everyone that walks in necessarily, but especially if you're going away to school and you're being intentional about your relationship with Jesus and trying to grow in that environment, and you come back and you've grown so much in your faith, and then you come back really excited about what God's been doing in your life, and then things are the same for those that are here, then it feels like you're not on the same page, maybe necessarily. And so that we all grow towards Christ. Almost in conclusion. But in conclusion for you ladies, because you've already done so much. And I gotta cut that out.
Oh my gosh.
It is. Tell me I'm wrong.
This should not be
fine. Listeners, come back in and argue with me. But anyway.
7,000.
Next time on Debates with Jeremy.
Next time on Reasons You Should Get Fired.
How to get fired in 10 days.
How to lose a job.
Lose a pastor in 10
There
days.
you go. No, in conclusion, because you guys have already done so much, I'm just so blessed to be not only a part of your lives, but to see how God is not only working in your life, but how he's given you both the confidence to share that with others, especially on a platform like on Sunday morning, which if you had told either of yourselves 2 years ago that you were going to be doing it, yeah, you should, I should have taken a picture to see how terrified Lydia's face was in that moment. Yeah, so I think it's just a lot of evidence of how you guys have grown and matured in your faith, and that, you know, being kingdom sighted and faithfulness over fear in something like this is just really encouraging to me, and I know to many others. And so is there anything that, while you have this platform of the podcast to share with the people that are all over the world, you're at like 30 some countries.
Wow. Jeremy, you should have said these questions like before, like earlier.
Well, if I had thought of them before we started recording, I would have.
Great.
And you can take time on that. But I do have one for Mom. Parents' perspective on seeing them up on stage, leading in multiple aspects of music and testimony. What does it mean to you? As a parent to all the youth, but also of one specifically sharing her testimony.
Obviously, it makes you very proud. You can say you're very proud. Yeah. And it just kind of validates all the decisions you made, you know, in raising your children, you know, wanting to raise them in the church, wanting them to be involved, but also letting it be their choice. Makes you feel like, I don't know, you did the right thing in a way. That sounds really selfish. But no, it makes you proud that they could be able to take that path and that you were a part of it, but they also did it on their own. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make sense.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, like, my goal for my own kids has always been that they'd be able to stand on my shoulders. That
I've seen them all do that.
Well, not literally.
Oh.
It's a metaphor, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's a metaphor. I know you struggle with this.
Well, James.
But that they would be able to stand on my shoulder, that they'd be able to start at a further point than I was able to, because of what I've learned, because of what I've been able to pass on to them. And as I've become a pastor and moved into middle age and all that stuff, like seeing all the kids up there this past Sunday. Like, I felt that way about all of them. Some I've known longer, like Lydia. She mentioned in her testimony, we were at Trinity prior to coming here to Collingswood together. So like Elizabeth, I haven't known you as long, but I still feel that like satisfaction's not really the right word, but maybe gratitude that it's actually happening. Like I can see a maturity and an ability to lead and a seriousness in their faith in the young people of our church that I didn't have as a teenager. And that's such an encouragement to me in the midst of a world where in my lifetime, up until just recently, all I've known is the church in the West in decline. And to see young people who are taking their faith seriously, who I see Jesus working in and working through, gives me so much hope for the church moving into the future.
Going back to Joanna because she's gotten settled in.
Should go back to this.
One of the things as a parent I worry about for myself is, will I have the patience for when they come to faith on their own and when they decide to take that up on their own and have that walk? Because like we all pray for like the 5-year-old says the prayer and then they're just like super all about Jesus from that point on. And that's not everybody's testimony, even if they're a pastor's kid or they're taking to church every single week. Sometimes it's into their 30s after they have kids and all that kind of stuff. What encouraged you and gave you just like that persistent spirit in trying to like lead them in the right direction while also giving them the space to experience it for their own?
See, it's hard.
I mean, for me, I grew up in the church and my mom was my youth leader. So, and she was never persistent with me, but she led by example. And I think that that's how I sort of looked at it as a parent. You have to lead by example. If you're going to church and you're living your life that way, then your children are obviously going to see that. But at the same time, they do need to make their own decisions, and you don't want to push too hard because a lot of parents know when you push too hard, then it backfires on you. But I think you just have to lead by example. You have to pray for your children, and you just have to do the best you can. But, give them the experiences. Like, we went to specific churches because they had children's programs, because they had youth programs, we relied on their youth leaders to guide them and be a good example too, and give them advice when, they don't want to hear it from a parent. So you just have to provide those experiences and just hope that they will continue.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, because a lot of people overlook the importance of the example aspect of it, and it's I need to teach them the right doctrine. I need to make their schedule revolve around Jesus things, and they leave it at just those two, and they think that that's the only aspects of spiritual leadership in the home, where I think the prioritizing your walk of faith so that it can be an example to your kids and they see the fruit of your walk of faith.
Yeah, and I think that authenticity piece is so key, because I think so many people raise their kids in the church and they don't really live out that relationship themselves. And when our kids see us saying church is important, Jesus is important, and then we live like jerks 6 days a week, 5, 6, 7, I mean, take your pick. The gospel loses its power when we don't actually see it being lived out. And I think that's especially true the closer people are to us.
Yeah, because they know you best.
Right.
And that whole old parenting thing of like, do as I say, not as I do. It was like, well, if you're not living in the Spirit, well then, how am I supposed to believe that you can live in the Spirit? Like, just in general. And so that's why I'm learning wrestling. And so I've given the ladies some time. I'll let you get back to the most comfortable of seats. Thank you so much. Having this platform to share with other believers in the congregation that maybe you don't get to talk to very often, or get to impart the wisdom that God has provided you in your time here on earth, what is something else that you may want to share, that even if it sounds like something so simple that everyone probably already knows, that you find to be extremely important in your walk of faith?
Okay, so I know I've already said this, but just the fact that God's plan is always right. I knew it was his plan that I was going to come here and eventually be sharing my testimony on the stage. And I'll just say it was not easy to get up on that stage. I know Pastor Scott does it every week. And for me to do it once a week and be like, oh, nervous.
But I still hate it.
Yeah.
So do I. Someone talked to me today that never met me, and they're like, "Oh, you're a pastor. You know, so comfortable and good on stages and people." I was like, "Do you know how many? I've come a long way." But because you guys know me from every time I spoke at Trinity from the pulpit, I had at least a 45-minute anxiety attack getting prepared at home, trying to find the right outfit, get my hair just the right, like the things that I was in control of in my mind, sweating through everything, hyperventilating, and then coming back and then sweating through my clothes before I even start preaching. And so to get from that to, believe it or not, in the past month, one of the Sundays, I forgot to put product in my hair before preaching. That is how far I've gone.
I still don't even like to eat on days that I know I'm going to preach. Like, because I do better if there's nothing in my stomach rather than worrying that I'm actually going to vomit on the platform. That would be terrible. So I feel that.
That's why you don't always come to coffee time and get.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, it wasn't easy, especially even when, like, I told Jeremy I wanted to share my testimony on Student Sunday. That wasn't me. Like, I felt like God leading me to do that. I was like, wait, do I really want to do this? Do I just like the idea of, like, sharing and, like, being up there? Or am I really doing this because God wants me to? And then eventually I was like, okay, God wants me to do this even though I don't really want to. I'm a little scared to get up on the stage, have everybody looking at me while I'm sharing my personal life. But in the end, it ended up being, like, such a blessing that I was able to get up there. Like, I was talking to Sean at Primos. I told him it was me and God on that stage, and that was it. Like, I'm just so glad, like, I followed God's, like, telling me to do that, and eventually came out to be such an amazing experience.
And that's in discernment, as Elizabeth talked a lot about discernment in her testimony of, like, the things that you don't want to do for yourself and how you feel and all that kind of stuff. But you know that, like, it's good for the kingdom and God wants you to do it. And, well, like, that's when it really, like, locks in my confidence of, like, this is what he wants me to do. Because I know it's good for his kingdom, for him to receive glory. And I don't want to do it. That combination, usually with other factors, depending on the specifics, but a general rule of thumb for myself.
Yeah. That's like the minute that I actually want to be up in front of people and feel like I've got something to say to people, that's when I need to start worrying. You know, it's as long as I feel this healthy amount of fear and I do it anyway because I know it's what God's called me to, I think I'm okay.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, any parting shots?
I think mine was like very similar to Lydia's, but I think also I wanted to make the emphasis on like how much joy you have after you like trust his plans. Like not even like sometimes like it's not in the moment, obviously, almost never in the moment. But then like after it's just like later on when you see the fruits that it produced, like it's just the best thing ever. And I don't like anyone out there who has like a big decision or something or is scared to make that jump, just do it because tomorrow or like even like 3 months from now you're just gonna be like, whoa, God did that, and that's like the coolest thing ever. And I don't know, it's just like filled me with so much joy. And it's like I didn't think I was ever gonna actually like give a testimony in church because I can't even order my own food, so
I witnessed that, and that's why I gave her ketchup packets. You can ask Liz about that at a later time. But a song that our friend Alana, she shared on her story this song called Hindsight by Van Buren, which I will put in the show notes. And essentially is talking about how, like, always seeing God's faithfulness in hindsight. Like, every time I look in hindsight, I see God's faithfulness. And so, like, in the times that we don't understand things, and the times that we were faithful and never thought about, like, how fruitful it would be or what God could use it for greater than we ever thought, that, like, in retrospect, we're always able to see in hindsight his faithfulness and how he's using it. And in the times that we don't, trusting the constant theme of his plan and that he's using it for good. Anyway, all of this said and done is that we're Scott and I are quitting. The youth are getting full-time jobs and saving college tuition. And we can continue to have every part of the body continue to lead the church forward. And I'm just blessed to be a part of this congregation and what God is doing.
Well, that's our conversation for today, but that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.